Well, as far as teaching is concerned, if you're working in a urban environment, there's one thing you have to want. You have to have a feeling for the kids and that you work with, because there are many opportunities when you're going to go home and you're going to cry because things are not working out right and kids are back talking to you. The one things that I do remember, and that's based not on any textbook, that many youngsters who act out in school act out not necessarily because they're troublemakers. They sometimes act out because they rather be called a troublemaker than stupid. Mm-hmm. And I realized even in some of the most serious cases, and when I dealt with guidance, I found that the kid basically couldn't read or couldn't write. And so success to me was extremely important. I remember that I had some art challenges that I could, I was a minor artist. I would draw these huge murals, and the kids that I had really basically had trouble reading. I wasn't their best teacher in that area. But I remember declaring the class color. One kid was red, one was black, one green. And I would mark off on this huge mural red, black, green, and everything. And they would paint in their one colors. And at the end, I would take a black paint and I would sort of outline everything. And I remember how proud these kids were. So they could walk around saying they had success. That I started to do my own reading material, writing on the World Daily News and stuff. And I don't know how successful I was, but I realized to a certain extent we began to laugh at each other, so that's another area. You have to have humor. The third aspect, if you go home and you're miserable about the day, there's a tendency to blame the kids, and that is, and there's plenty of reason to blame the kids. Some of them challenge you, they use curse words and everything, and if they feel you care for them and you like them and you really want to see them succeed, they will tolerate an awful lot from you. If they sense you don't care, I remember I had, when I was doing recreation, I had a lot of, I would call superstars working with me that would teach athletics to the kids in the after school and evening. And if I would find a 4'9" Puerto Rican kid would fight a 6'2" college athlete if he felt for any one moment that that person hated him. I had a nickname at one time. I was called Spick, and that was a word of honor. And yet I saw knife fights break out for the same word that was used. And occasionally I would call them greenhorns, but I think I was at a good time in the sense that even though gangs were flourishing in New York when I was running one of the recreation centers, that they were very outward groups. They wore jackets and they had names like the Dragons and the Viceroys. And the point I'm trying to bring out, they were highly noticeable. I think their weapons, maybe knives and the aerials on cars. But things changed with the drugs. And I remember very attending funerals of kids that had overdosed. It only became, no one seemed to care at that time, but when it started to spread out to the outer areas and suburbia, I think then it became a crisis. It was a crisis long before that, and And to be honest with you, I couldn't quite handle it in my area. I couldn't even judge which kids were susceptible. The old kind of theory that if you came from a broken home, and that I saw families that were solid, and yet one or two kids in the family died. I had kids come over to my house, and I didn't normally approve of that, and asked them. They asked me to turn them into the police. I also worked very closely with the police. I felt there was a period of upheaval, Vietnam and stuff like that, and institutions were kind of being destroyed, and I sensed that to a certain extent that was okay. The institutions to a large extent needed change, but when they were destroyed there was no substitute for that, and I thought that the police, even though I was not an advocate of a lot of policemen, I thought they were good policemen and bad policemen. They were good people, they were good government, they were bad government. I felt that they needed support, so I became very active with the police department in developing community relations with the kids. I worked with that to a large extent. I worked with some corporations. I helped, and then I worked with some of the organizations. The youth board was my hope that that would be my career, as I indicated earlier, but they pulled the rug from that financially, and but the whole system that I thought that I would be part of suddenly was more or less taken over by groups like Grosvenor House, Guarded Riverside. These are community agencies in the area. The area where I live has been gentrified, and the old brownstones that used to have the kids and the numbers have changed, and to a large extent people living in the area probably don't remember the bad days, and people are less concerned about what was going on than they are in real estate values, etc. And I thought community should be an extension of family, as well as the schools should be community schools that basically take the family, the education, the citizenship, the foreigners, the non-speaking, and make it a center. The schools can't do that for financial reasons, but it's been picked up by some agencies. I can't say I'm overjoyed with the political climate this particular moment. I'm not going to get into politics because somebody's going to hear this or see me and they're going to get angry. I make it a real effort to try and get into the minds of people that disagree with me, and try and understand them. I don't question their motives until I understand what their motives are. To a large extent, I think we become so in what I call the arrogance of conviction. Most people that I meet are so sure that they are right. It's almost pathetic to me, because after, something like 40 years in all areas of education, recreation, I don't know the answers. To this very day, like I said, I spent an awful lot of time more on failure than I do on success. And what did I do wrong, or what could I have done better, and maybe this could work. And I know that textbook answers sometimes are very helpful, because I think you need that for those young people that are starting professions. But there really is no answer to experience. You have to live it, you have to work, you have to understand it. I think some of the statistical study shows that, you know, a large number of teachers, I'm not going to get into percentages, leave in the first or second year after they start, and but maybe true in a lot of professions. And my wife used to say to young actresses, you have to love it, and you have to follow your dream. At one time that you feel the dream doesn't exist anymore, then it's time to get out. My wife is Anna Berger. We were married over 50 years. I was running a program at Joan of Arc, which is a school in the area, junior high school. It was an experimental school that probably developed the first program in terms of youth board involvement, where they had recreation, a public school, and after school and evening. They have adult education and everything, and what happened basically is that I had a weekend program where I had teenage dances both on the weekend and during the week occasionally, which brought the community together, which I thought at that time. It was really attended beautifully. There was maybe 200 kids coming at one time. I found to a certain extent that it was getting a little bit too much for me to handle completely, particularly since there were two gyms and I was running a program upstairs, and the program I was running upstairs was a basketball tournament, and it was requiring a lot of my staff, and so at this juncture, I decided I think I needed more staff. So I said to the overall director that I got to get some new help for these programs, you know, particularly if I was going to expand. And in comes my wife as a drama teacher. I said, I'll use clean language, but I said something to the effect, what the hell do I need a drama teacher at this time? I was actually looking for a 6'5" guy that could prove that I wasn't a coward. And she showed up. The reality was that she attracted an awful lot of the kids, and some of them were not the nicest kids in the world. And then I had to worry about another thing. If someone threw out one of those language things at them, they would jump off the stage and start beating them up. So I felt very strongly that I had to protect both the actors and the performers, you know. But we became very close, and evidently, I think, and we got married. She decided that we ought to get married privately, so we knew a judge, and we said we'd keep it a secret because we would have a formal wedding. So a judge friend, Judge Sala, who became quite famous in New York for handling some trials, pardon me for a second.
Okay.
He arranged for us to meet a judge in Brooklyn, and he performed the wedding early breakfast, and I came home, and everything. We had the wedding a week later, and I thought it was a secret, and suddenly my wife broke it to me that she had told her mother, and I remember saying, "You told your mother." And I didn't tell my mother. So I realized that I had something for the next 100 years that I could use, you know, to combat that sexy bit. And I used it. You told your mother. To this day, all I can see, enough is enough, but I said, you told your mother. I don't know, love is the way people think about it. I know I wanted to be with her. If that's love, that's love. If it means heart palpitations and all the things that they describe, I don't believe that happened in the sense. I think it's respect, wanting to be with her, that intimacy, not necessarily sexually, though she was always after my body, I know that. The truth of the matter is, I think those are the things that will last. The others, they're good. There's nothing wrong with them, but I don't know if they will last in the event of tragedy or things that happen. We had a good marriage. I think good marriage to a large extent is respect for each other. I certainly respected her work because very often it would be 3 to 6 months that we were separated. She would go to California and or on the road, and I would be home. I don't think you could tolerate that if there wasn't that mutual respect that each one of us was doing for the general welfare of the family. Advice for actors, particularly young actors, to get married. Never get married when things are great. I'm telling this to the woman or the young lady who's doing the camera. I have known so many cases where they're on tour, they fall in love, and they're all making top dollars, and it's a kind of, I think for my own family, including my wife, I felt that to a certain extent I had to be a balance. First of all, I had to make sure that I had a steady income to provide them for the lows in their careers. Second, when they were overjoyed with the prospect of getting a job, and God knows we were close to a lot of big jobs, I had to moderate, keep the enthusiasm, but bring it down to a level where if it didn't go right, they wouldn't be devastating. I remember in the case of my daughter and my wife that they are exposed to, they're actually exposing themselves when they audition, and they are refused or accepted on grounds that are something totally irrelevant to them. It had nothing to do with them. They were either too small or too tall. The actor, they wanted someone younger or older. I remember my wife was one of the originals in Tevye and His Daughters, which was the beginning of Fiddler on the Roof. And because she had been on Broadway in the, at that time, she had a chance at being in the show when it first started. And I remember she could sing and she had done some stock, but I remember coming home and finding her crying after an audition. And my wife is a pro. It just normally don't happen. And she didn't get it. And she was very upset. She was going to play Goldie because that was the part. And I used humor a lot. Humor is probably the answer to 90% of the problems, even in education when you feel totally depressed about a situation. I remember she said, "Get on the phone and call my mother." I looked at her. Her mother had died, you know, and so I said, "This is," the kids stood there sitting around stunned, you know, and so they hadn't seen their mother crying. I remember getting to the phone and dialing some stupid number, and I said, "Your mother isn't available. Could you speak to Aunt Hansha?" And I remember that we all cracked up. So, actually, I've used humor as an extent of meeting a lot of the tragedies in life. At the end, I became part of her work, which I tried to avoid to a certain extent because I couldn't, I was too nervous watching her, especially in the later years when she was difficulty walking and a few things. And I remember setting up this stage and worrying about the wires and everything. And I realized, and like her and so many other actors I had known in the past, in spite of age or injury or something, once they got on the stage, it was all gone. And I'm very proud of her. She was more than just an actress. She was a mentor. Many of the young students that she taught describe her as an angel. One daughter follows in her footsteps. The other one is a hairstylist. The Actors Studio gave her 2 memorials. Marty Landau gave her one in California, and the studio here did. And I think, well, I don't feel she achieved the so-called celebrity status that people place so much value on. She was a working actress. She had tremendous respect among her peers. She was treated very well when she went, even if she didn't receive the job. And I'm kind of proud of my daughters, but the same way.